I grew up in the bush and just loved being on the beach and out on the mud flats. And so I think that's really influenced my art practice. I've always had a real connection to creating spaces and the experience of being in those spaces. So I think, it was a natural progression for me to create immersive or tactile experiences that relate to nature. I was lucky enough to be taught traditional Aboriginal weaving by Cherie Johnson and Auntie Daniela Chesney. I connected with this when I first had my child, and I was feeling a bit disconnected, and I joined a women's weaving group and it just clicked and I just loved it. I live and work around Islington and around Throsby Creek where we see the mullet jumping, and so I wanted to tell a saltwater story. I wanted to tell a story that connected myself to my childhood. So we'll be creating a large-scale mullet, and this will then be cast in aluminium, and we'll create a beautiful school of mullet that circulates up in the atrium space and shows that movement and dynamic shape of the fish schooling and swimming in that space. When I eventually landed on the idea of a school of mullet, I really needed some assistance on how to make this large-scale sculpture. And so I turned to my friend and sculptor collaborator, Julie Squires, who has such knowledge and expertise on how to turn, especially First Nations artists' ideas and techniques into a large-scale sculpture.
Even though I'm not Aboriginal, I have Aboriginal family who are Warlpiri from Yuendamu, and I think it's a great honour trying to share my sort of sculptural skill with working with Aboriginal artists in a collaborative way.
The collaborative process that Julie and I work with really starts from the very beginning.
It's actually one of the exciting, wonderful parts is to sit down and brainstorm and nut it out.
We did a lot of trial and error, lots of little models, little maquettes to see how we could get this to work, and finally landed on the idea of weaving individual fish and then casting them in aluminium and then welding them together to create the form.
For many years now I've been using industrial sand casting. With the woven fish it's quite thin. So with sand casting the way you do it is you make like a two-part mould. So a top and a bottom, and the fish is basically sandwiched in between, and it's embedded into sand that has a resin stirred through it. So the resin sets like a rock and it takes a negative impression of either side of the fish, and then we put the two halves together and pour the metal in between. So you get a lot of sort of flashing, which is the metal leaching into those seam lines, and that's sort of the beauty when you're working on the finished, in this case a fish. You grind back all that and you bring it back to that pristine element in the end.
I feel so lucky to be given this opportunity to tell a story that's really personal to me, but is really connected to Newcastle. This is one of my first major commissions and is a very, large and substantial work for me. I'd really like to thank the Newcastle Art Gallery Society for supporting this commission, and I'm really also grateful to the Awabakal descendants for supporting me. For a local artist telling a local story to be exhibited as the entry artwork at the new expanded art gallery, I think is so important, and I feel really privileged.